So, yeah, I mean, it's the 22nd here. It's not quite the 22nd where you are. So the album is on the verge of being released, I believe,
So
right?
you're technically the first person on earth I have spoken to on release day.
Fantastic. That's something. So how are you feeling about releasing it with all the stuff that's going on? And,
I mean, I am obviously, as anybody is, aware of hopefully things doing well and, and streaming and, being playlists on Spotify, all those great things that have been happening so far.
right.
But I truthfully just made the record because I thought it would be an absolute blast to get together with a bunch of my friends. And I wanted to do something creative that I would get an email back from them going, oh, that's a great song.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I really cared about. And everything that's happened post and as is true with most things in life, whenever you don't try to do something for any kind of commercial sense, it winds up being the more successful thing you do.
Right.
But yeah, that was my whole motive, is just really to be, creative. And I'm such a fan of all these guys collectively and individually and everything they do. So to get to work with them, it was one of those things where I was like, hey, what a wonderful way to spend a month or two exchanging information with all these types of people.
Yeah. So was this album put together fairly recently or before the COVID thing happened?
I started writing at the very beginning of March.
Okay.
And then finished it with mixes and all this special guests and everything by May.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty quick. And you do have some guests. So tell folks a little bit about who your friends are and what they've done on this record.
I always feel such pressure because there's so many that if I don't actually say
well, you
names,
don't have to mention them all.
I'll try to go. So the concept was, I thought, hey, it'd be really fun if I reach out to like 20, 30 of my friends, see if they would participate. And then I assumed by the nature of life, everyone would say no because they were touring and doing these other things. And, not for any mean reasons other than just life being crazy.
Right.
And everybody said yes, to the point where there was even other ones that we were going to do stuff like I was talking about, collaborating potentially with Corey Taylor from Slipknot. And
right.
Just ran out of time and space. Butch Walker, Devin Townsend, David Ellefson, Bumblefoot, Benji Webb from Skindred, Clay Cook from the Zach Brown Band, Kyle Sanders from Hell Yeah, Andy Blacksugar, Todd Latore from Queensryche, Edu Kominatu, who plays drums with both Jeff Tate and Jeff Scott Soto, Kevin Scott, who plays with Wayne Krantz and Jimmy Herring, and actually played with the John McLaughlin Orchestra on the last reunion or last tours. Emil Wursler, brilliant guitar player. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody because I always feel so terrible.
Well, you mentioned Devin Townsend. He was just here in New Zealand not that long ago, and I spoke to him, and so he's appearing on Bring Out Your Dead, I believe is the song. So just for an example of how you work together with these collaborators, how did you work with Devin?
It was very similar for everybody. I mean, initially I asked everybody and everyone wrote back really kindly. And then I wrote all the records and kind of built the frameworks of the songs. And then, I should have, although if I would have planned it more and really put deep thought into how everything was going to play out, it would have been a disaster. So I kind of was like, I finished. Let me send that to Butch and this to Devin. And Devin at one point was going to play bass on one track, but then Bumblefoot wanted to play the solo on that track. So Devin was like, well, I'll play a solo on this track. Right. And it really came across in this unbelievably organic, non-ego, just everyone was so thrilled to participate and help out. I'm sure it will never, ever happen again. It's like one of those bizarre lining up of the planets. Because normally anytime you get that happen, it's just a disaster. One guy can't do it, or his part's not the right part, or everyone was just so ready to play. And obviously these guys are just, the badassery level is so high that, it was just, I feel like I'm guesting on their record.
Right. That's cool. But you mentioned that initially this started with you writing the songs first. So what kind of headspace were you in when you were writing these songs? Is there something that ties them together or something?
I don't think it's a concept record in the classic sense of the concept records we probably both grew up with, like, The Wall or,
Right.
but I think there's a theme, there's a thread that there's this dark steampunk 1920s, really low budget freak show carnival
Right.
esque theme, a thread, the disillusionment and just that kind of thread that runs through everything collectively. I really have pity on the person that tries to find the one narrative and goes through the whole record like that, because it's more like if you're walking around in this place and you decide to go over here for a minute and then you get a snack and then you go to that attraction. It's not laid out in a way where you have to, I don't think they rely on each other to make sense.
Yeah. Well, as far as the theme goes, I guess part of that comes across in the video you did for Apology, the animated thing and the artwork. So tell me a little bit about what went on as far as putting that together.
Wayne Joyner is the gentleman who actually created the artwork with a friend of his, Lucas, I can't never say his name correctly, Warmbisher, who did a lot of the animation for it. This record, both in terms of the artwork and the video so far, I've really never been in a situation where it ever comes out the way I envisioned it to come out.
Right.
It's always been some kind of sacrifice, either budgetarily back in the days when I was on Atlantic, or the art directors were so powerful back in the day. For right or wrong, there was just all these other limitations to it, or we just made bad decisions. This is the first time where I really feel like the art person who created the artwork for the record, his name is Robert Merrick, just really captured it. And then the video, and there's a new one coming out tomorrow, actually, that another guy did, Tim Fox from the UK. They've just captured, I feel like, oh, that's a dimension of the record that I really wanted to see.
Right.
And I think that's true of Apology. It's not something I would have thought up, but it felt like an extension.
Right. Very cool. So what song are you doing, releasing a video for tomorrow?
Tomorrow will be Beyond Hope, which has David Ellefson, Benji Webb from Skindred, and Bumblefoot, and Ricky Sanders on drums.
Give me a little background on that song, as far as why you wrote it and how did you talk to the gentleman who's made the video and give him some suggestions about what you wanted to have it come across?
I've learned the older I get, and it's a great lesson to learn shortly before you expire off the planet. By the time I'm 90, I'm going to be the most on it artist you've ever seen. But the key to success in creative endeavors when you're starting to create things is all won or lost by the picking of who you're going to work with.
Right.
You know what I mean? So these guys are just really great. The album, I mean, just to give you a little history of the way I think about music, is probably a little different maybe than most people. From where I was a little kid, my first experience with music, I remember my parents having like an 8-track of Hard Day's Night. Yeah. And I remember like The Fifth Dimension. And
right.
then I remember like AM Gold Radio, just sitting in the back seat, like driving in New York, just whatever, mom taking you around. I remember those songs and those hooks. And then I grew up in a really bizarre place, like where to me, like to this day, Barry Manilow is as important to me as Meshuggah. I love them both.
Fair enough.
What I mean? I just love music. I love Miles Davis. I mean, I just love that stuff. So what I think happens is over a lifetime, all that kind of content gets mixed up in my juice tiger of a brain.
Right.
And because I have no attention span to in a detailed way, like recreate what I heard, it just gets filtered in this bizarre way and kind of comes out like I'm such a Prince fan, such a Elvis Costello fan, such a Tom Waits fan.
Right.
All this stuff is just, and if you everyone always asks me, what's your desert album, desert record, or deserted island record or whatever, I'm like, I'm going to have to kill you. Like that's my answer. Is like, if that's the question you're going to ask me, we're going to have to fight, because I can't answer that,
Right.
because
Right.
they're
Gotcha.
all so important to me.
Yep.
And so that's the way a lot of this record, it always, it's not really so much a conscious effort. I find it creatively, like I just try to get out of my own way. Like there's a side of my brain that I don't understand, that I don't think I want to understand, and I shouldn't dialogue with. So when I'm being creative, I just kind of like, and let that all come out. And these songs tend to really come to me in one chunk at one time. Even the lyrical content, melodies and the riffs all kind of come very quickly. And then obviously I go back and go, well, that word doesn't make any sense, or, you know, or I could change this. But generally speaking, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of like channeling something, or really just getting out of my own way. That's how music's always been for me.
Yeah, very cool. Now, you alluded to the fact that there's kind of a carnival sideshow vibe to the whole thing, and you know, you're the Baron von Beliski Orchestra. So in your formative years, did you go to a lot of carnivals and circuses and sideshows? Does that have any effect on what you're doing now?
A little bit. I mean, not as much as one would think. I mean, I do remember going to Madison Square Garden with my dad for one Ringling Brothers thing. I remember going to see the Harlem Globetrotters, which are not a circus, but were a circus. I think, you know, and this is, I want to be very clear. I was very young, and this is a different time, because now I wouldn't do it. But I remember going to a rodeo, and you know, and things like that. Just you know, whatever, like little entertainment. But most impactful to me, I think, was my whole family on my mother's side worked in Broadway, in the box offices and all the main theaters. So when I was young, I would literally get babysat by being dropped off. They would go to work and leave me in the theater to watch the show.
Right.
So I remember seeing like Doug Henning's magic show like 100 times.
Nice.
You know, so that has an effect on somebody, I think, at some point, especially when you're really young. And that's just, you know, I just grew up in an environment where like, oh, I guess it seemed like real life to me.
Yep.
And it wasn't until later that I realized someone else's dad worked in insurance, and someone else's dad, you know, I've always felt comfortable about carnival folk and show folk. And, you know, that vaudeville thing, I think, which is obviously not still a thing, but it's always in the back of my head. It's like, that's what life is supposed to be.
Gotcha. Now you mentioned that, you know, that was a different time. It's also a different time now than it was when you wrote these songs. I mean, even from day to day, it changes these days, literally. So how do you feel about how these songs are going to be perceived, and how music in general is being digested at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when this all started, I was the pandemic. I was like, oh, you know, it just came to me when I was starting the record. I was like, songs for the apocalypse. Yeah. That's kind of really funny. And then now I look at it like, wow, it's a little bit too on the nose.
Not so funny.
not quite as tongue as cheek as I'd hoped, but I think it rings, you know, I think the spirit of it rings true. And yeah, I mean, it's been such an unbelievably mentally abusive year. Probably not so much in New Zealand because you have competent leadership, but it's been like all the things I thought we were done with in terms of just humanity just came all flooding back again, and just came out from under the rock, and so much hatred and stupidity. Just that's the part that annoys. I don't mind like a vicious, intelligent killer. Like that, at least I can find some charm in the thought process. But just dumbness has no allure to me. Like it's just frustrating. And when you can't argue with people or even rationalize, and it just comes from people that have no experience of the world, never been anywhere, so they're afraid of everybody. Right. And like in my experiences, and I've traveled maybe not as extensively but I've been in the jungles of Indonesia and like met the most delightful, happy people. Now, I'm sure there's another story of someone being killed somewhere, you know, but that's true in New York City.
Exactly.
I mean, that can happen anywhere in the world. But generally speaking, I think odds are you walk up to the first person you see and say or ask for help or, you know, or direction. I mean, most people I've ever experienced want the same things. And so that's just been a bit disappointing to, you know, when you wake up and realize like, no, half the planet is fucking insane.
Yeah. You know, well, hopefully things are shifting in a better direction. I mean, I watched the inauguration yesterday, and you know, it felt I'm not particularly a warm and fuzzy person, but it felt like, things had changed almost immediately. The whole vibe.
It did feel like I found myself misting up during Katy Perry's performance, like with and I'm just like, and I was like,
Yep.
and I'm not one, like you said, I'm not like that invested. I do believe politics is just show business.
Yeah.
For the most part,
Yep.
But I mean, it did like, and I know things are going to go back to exactly the same level of nothing getting done and frustration as ever. But at least the spokesperson makes me feel like I can go to bed at night.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You mentioned Katy Perry, and I watched Jennifer Lopez and Lady Gaga as well. And no matter what you think about those artists, it was the music that was the most affecting of the performance of whatever the inauguration was than even the speeches. Although the young poet was quite
she was
impressive as well. But yeah, it was the music that really made the difference.
And look, we could talk about policy all day long, but I just know that whatever party the Foo Fighters are going to, that's the one I want to be.
Right.
If you compare the lineups entertainment-wise, and it's a very superficial way to look at your political beliefs, but it seemed like one had a lot more great artists and fun.
Right. Were you a Ted Nugent fan?
Yeah, I mean, not even the disrespect, Ted, but how many times are you going to listen to Stranglehold in an evening?
Fair enough. Well, yeah. Man. So, I mean, this music that you make is loud, it's aggressive, it sounds like it's begging to be performed in front of people. And of course, you haven't been able to do that for a while, I'm assuming. How is there a light at the end of the tunnel, and how are you dealing with that?
I went into the new year being very optimistic, and then obviously the first week here or so was like, I was like, oh, so this is how it all ends. Like just when you think it's coming to an end, the horde of zombies comes and overtakes the planet.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic, man. I'm hoping that, with at least people taking the pandemic a little bit more seriously here in terms of the governmental aspects of distribution of vaccine and manufacturing of that stuff, and the world obviously going through the same thing, that by late summer, by fall, optimistically, we can start to see the world come back to some semblance of normalcy.
Yep.
Obviously, my main concern is just everybody being safe, and it's not so fun going to a show when you hear, and you're like,
right, yeah, that is a bit off-putting. Yes,
I used to do that anyway, but now it's a whole different level of. So hopefully that'll it'll be behind us, and it'll just feel like this weird, strange dream. And but I'm so looking forward to getting this record out live with a bunch of musicians. It'll be an ambitious record to bring to life. So it's like kind of fun.
So have you thought about who you're going to have playing with you and how you're going to present this music?
Well, I mean, I obviously we're all buddies, and I'd love to take a lot of the guys that are on the record, depending on. Right. But I think David Ellefson might have commitments with Megadeth.
Right.
That might supersede his desire to come jam with me.
Fair enough.
So in a perfect world, I'd like to get a couple of the guys when available, and then I think it'd be really great to get the freshest, newest, youngest blood available in terms of musicians. Not that playing with me will be a career changer for any, but to get like that new, there's nothing like playing around musicians that are just discovering it for the first time. There's an energy that comes from that. And and there's so many brilliant young musicians that I'd like to kind of get a combo of the grizzled veterans and the nursery school kids. Yeah.
Well, one thing I think has happened in the interim year is that the genre music has broken down. People don't think in terms of I'm metal and I'm pop and I'm punk and I'm hip hop. It seems to all blend together more in both the minds of the musicians and the listeners than it has in the past.
Oh, it's so funny you say that, because that's been one of my rallying. I keep saying the same thing. I'm like, when I was a kid, you sat at the heavy metal table or the new wave table or the punk table. And you didn't even you'd get in fights over like the Clash versus Kit, whatever it was. Like literal fist fights would break out. Like
sure.
And now I was talking to my son, and like he does not. None of him and his friends care. Like it's like that's a great. The Stones, great. AC/DC, awesome. Metallica, Rihanna, awesome. Dua Lipa, great. Lizzo, they just want to hear good tunes. And because of the diversity of what I've always done, I feel like, and just from the initial reviews of the record and people kind of embracing it, fortunately so far, it feels like some of the way I've always operated is more home now. than ever before. Like,
Right.
just people don't care. And I don't think they don't care. It's just, I guess when we were growing up, you had music and sports and maybe the Dukes of Hazzard TV show once a week. There was only so many things
Yeah.
going, and now these kids have 50 things going on
Yeah.
that are all cool. So music is an important but smaller part of their life.
Yeah.
And so they just respond to tunes, and that, and that's the way I've always been. I mean, I've always just been like, that person's a great at what they do. If it, I'm not the biggest country fan, but man, when there's a great country artist,
Sure.
I know I can respect that. I'm in. I just want to see great stuff.
Yep.
So hopefully that's the way music moves over the coming months.
And as we're talking, I'm kind of thinking, well, this is how kind of music reflects the greater society, because that's how it seems that people are looking at other people, even though they're not the same. They look different, they believe different things, but they're hopefully more accepting of them these days, which is what we need to have.
Yeah, man. It's like, like obviously you've moved around quite a bit. I mean, you start to realize that I think generally speaking, people would like to be able to pay their mortgage, eat some good food with friends and drinks, and call it a night. I mean, that's generally the highest. I mean, that is the majority of the world. And all the rest of the detail stuff is just not important to me.
Yep.
To me.
So these songs that comprise, then there's 15 songs, so it's significant. But it's out.
One could say self-indulgent. One could say self-indulgent.
You could, but I would never.
I know.
But so have you been writing much in the interim since then? Have you got stuff planned?
I mean, obviously, because I had so much fun and everything went so well on this record, I am just a glutton for the fact that I'll try to do it again and everything will go horribly wrong.
Right.
So when something works, why not just try to do it again and abuse it? But no, I'd love to collaborate with a bunch more people and keep this process going. And I think the cool thing about the Baron von Bielski Orchestra is that it's really fluid. So we can constantly be changing things up, changing musicians. There's literally ultimate artistic freedom to do whatever we want to do as it grows. So yeah, but I'm always playing, always in the studio. I mean, I'm really fortunate in that sense, and being creative, and that's what keeps me sane. If it weren't for like that, it kind of shows you, I'm sure you feel the same way. You never before realized how important like Netflix and books and music, because if this pandemic happened and it wasn't for those things, why live? I wouldn't have lived through it.
And I'll tell you, to be perfectly honest, just doing these interviews, I mean, I've never done a Zoom interview until last year. I think I've done over 200 of them. So,
oh, wow.
It's just like, well, who am I going to talk with today? It doesn't even matter what the music is about. It's just meeting people and talking to them.
It's good for the soul, man. And I'm not a spiritual guy, but it definitely, it just interacting with creative people, hearing about what they do and how they do it, to me is fantastic, But you realize, and I hope people walk away from this pandemic starting to realize, like, not only for the artists, which are obviously suffering, a lot of artists, but the venues and these other. It's like, the guy who brings the craft beer in and the waitresses and there's a whole economy that's just being devastated. So hopefully people start to think.
And if you think about it, the artistic community is probably the most heavily hit in the long term by all of this. So. I mean, most of the things you can get online, or you can, worm around it, but there's you can't equal the live experience of going out and seeing somebody perform in front of you.
No, and people have been asking me too. They're like, "Why don't you just do a big live stream thing?" And I have these opportunities, and I'm like, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it, because that'll come back to haunt me. But for me, like, the whole point of the way I perform and what I do is based on that interaction. So like, if there's no crowd or energy or anything going on, like I just don't feel like bouncing around in front of a bunch of cameras and like two key grips with it's no disrespect to the very talented key grip community that I'm sure is watching at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, but I hear you. Well, if you ever get a chance, come down here and play for us. We'd love to have you.
Oh, I'd love to, man. More than ever. I mean, every time I kept watching the country here, and I kept going, New Zealand. Why?
well, these things happen, but anyway, it looks like things are taking a turn for the better anyway where you are, so hang in there.
Thank you. I will do so, and hopefully I'd love to get there at some point during the next 12 24 months, but looking forward to it.
Okay, well, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you so much for taking the time again.
My
Stay
pleasure.
safe, and hopefully we can do it again.
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.